The snow had been falling for 6 days straight when Mara Ellington realized she was going to have to give away her children. Not temporarily. Not as some desperate loan until spring. Give away forever. She stood at the cracked window of the cabin Thomas had built 2 years before he vanished, watching white death pile against the doorframe like something trying to get in. Jonas was coughing again. That wet, rattling sound that meant his lungs were filling with fluid. She had no medicine to fight, no knowledge to cure. Blood specked his lips when he slept. Lila hadn't spoken in 3 days, hadn't asked for food, hadn't cried, hadn't done anything except stare at nothing with those huge, hollow eyes. The silence was somehow worse than Jonas's coughing. At least the coughing meant he was still fighting. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The money was gone. Thomas had disappeared 6 months ago, and with him went any hope of survival. The sheriff had organized search parties for exactly 1 week before declaring him lost to the wilderness. The town's charity had lasted 2 months, casseroles delivered with pitying looks, coins pressed into her palm with whispered blessings. Then winter came early and brutal, and everyone had their own children to feed. Charity has limits when your own babies are hungry. Mara had tried. God above, how she had tried. She'd taken in washing until her hands cracked and bled, scrubbing other people's linens in water, so cold it felt like knives. She'd sold everything. Thomas's tools, her mother's wedding ring, the furniture piece by piece until they slept on the floor. She'd begged the mercantile owner for credit, had gotten on her knees in front of men who looked through her like she was already dead. This morning she'd boiled the last handful of cornmeal into a paste so thin you could see through it. She divided it between Jonas and Lila while pretending she'd already eaten. The lie had come easily now. That's how she knew it was over. Mama? Jonas's voice drifted from the corner, where both children huddled under the single blanket that still held any warmth. His face was gray, his lips blue. Yes, baby? I'm cold. Really cold. Mara closed her eyes, pressed her forehead against the frozen glass until it burned. Behind her, Jonas's cough tore through the silence. Wet, desperate, wrong. When it finally stopped, his breathing sounded like wind through a broken door. She turned, looked at them. Really looked. Jonas was 7, had Thomas's dark hair and serious eyes. Used to ask her questions about everything. Why birds flew south, how stars stayed in the sky, whether heaven was cold. Now, he just stared, saving his energy for breathing. Lila was 4. Blonde curls that used to bounce when she laughed. She'd followed Mara everywhere, chattering endlessly about flowers and butterflies and whether snow had feelings. Now she was silent, so silent Mara sometimes forgot she was in the room. They were dying, slowly, quietly dying in front of her. And Mara was powerless to stop it. The decision crystallized like ice forming on still water, clear, cold, inevitable. She crossed the room, knelt beside them, pulled them both into her arms even though it hurt, even though the pain of holding them knowing what she was about to do felt like drowning. Listen to me, she whispered. Both of you, listen carefully. Jonas's eyes found hers. Lila burrowed deeper into her chest. We're going into town today. To see Mrs. Crawford. Why? Jonas asked, always asking why, even now. Because her voice cracked. She forced it steady. Because Mrs. Crawford knows families. Good families. Families who have warm houses and enough food and... Are we going to stay with them? Hope flickered in Jonas's voice. Hope was worse than the coughing. You are, baby. You and Lila. Silence. Without you. Mara couldn't answer. Her throat had closed completely. Jonas pulled back, stared at her with eyes too old for his face. Mama, no. It's just for a little while. You're lying. His voice rose, cracked. You're giving us away. I'm saving you. I don't want to be saved. Jonas's shout dissolved into that terrible cough that shook his whole frame. I want to stay with you. Lila started crying, not loud, just tears sliding down her hollow cheeks. That's not one of the choices, baby. Mara grabbed his shoulders. Don't you understand? This is the only way you survive. Then I choose to die. The words hit like a physical blow. Mara pulled him close, Lila too, held them both while they cried, and she didn't because if she started, she'd never stop. It's going to be all right, she whispered, hating herself for the lie. You'll have food and warm beds and people who can take care of you properly. And maybe someday when things are better. But Jonas had stopped listening. He was 7 years old and smart enough to recognize a fantasy when he heard one. Mara dressed them in every layer they owned, which wasn't many. Jonas's coat was too small, sleeves ending well above his wrists. Lila's had belonged to a neighbor's daughter, charity that had felt like kindness 4 months ago and felt like humiliation now. She dressed herself in the black dress she'd worn to Thomas's memorial service. Seemed appropriate. She was burying something today, too. Are we walking? Jonas asked, looking at the window where snow pelted the glass like thrown stones. Yes. In this, we don't have a choice. We could wait until the storm stops. We can't wait anymore. He understood. She could see it in his face, the terrible mathematics of survival that said 2 children might make it if 1 woman didn't. The walk to town was barely a mile. Might as well have been 100. Mara opened the door, and the blizzard screamed in like something alive, something furious. Snow bit exposed skin. The wind tried to shove them back inside. They stepped into it anyway. The figure knelt before her in the snow, and the entire street fell silent. Mara's vision blurred with cold and exhaustion, but she could see him clearly, impossibly clearly. White hair fell past his shoulders, stark against the black of his coat. His skin was pale as the snow itself, flawless and unnatural. The crown on his head wasn't decorative. It looked forged from something ancient, something that had seen centuries pass. And his eyes, God, his eyes, burned red like coals buried in ash, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to look away and couldn't. Behind him, 3 other figures materialized from the storm like shadows given form. The first was lean and sharp, dark hair pulled back, a blade strapped across his back that was too long to be practical and somehow looked perfectly natural on him. His eyes scanned the watching crowd with cold calculation, cataloging threats. The second was broader, silver threading through his dark beard, hands resting on twin daggers at his belt. He stood utterly still, but there was violence coiled in that stillness, a predator deciding whether to strike. The third was quiet, almost gentle in his bearing, but his eyes held something ancient and sad. He watched the children with an expression Mara couldn't quite name. None of them looked quite human. None of them looked quite alive. Why, the crown figure asked, his voice soft and terrible, would you give away what you cling to even in death? Mara's breath came in ragged gasps. Jonas whimpered against her chest. Lila's small fingers dug into her arm. Because her voice broke. She tried again. Because they'll live without me. The man tilted his head, studying her like she was something precious and broken. His gaze moved to Jonas, then Lila, and something shifted in those burning eyes, something almost tender. And what has driven you to such desperation? He asked. The question was gentle, but it shattered something inside her. The town, Mara's voice cracked completely. The town has nothing left to give. My husband is gone. I have no money, no family, no. She choked on the words. No one will help us. No one will even look at us anymore. Murmurs rippled through the crowd that had gathered at a careful distance. Shame-faced whispers. Defensive muttering. Someone said something about bad luck. Another voice mentioned, charity has limits. The man's expression changed. The tenderness vanished, replaced by something cold and controlled, rage compressed into perfect stillness. He stood slowly, snow swirling around him like smoke, and turned to face the watching townsfolk. The lean one, the one with the blade, shifted his stance, hand moving toward his weapon. The bearded one's eyes flashed silver in the dim light. The quiet one took a single step forward, placing himself between the crowd and the kneeling woman. "These people," the crowned man said softly, "watched you starve." It wasn't a question. Mara nodded, unable to speak. He looked at the crowd with something ancient and pitiless in his gaze. The sheriff stood frozen, hand on his holstered gun. Mrs. Crawford clutched her shawl. Mr. Bennet from the mercantile looked away. "Fascinating," the man said, his voice cutting through the wind like a blade through silk. "How quickly compassion dies when winter comes." He turned back to Mara, and his expression softened again, that strange, terrible gentleness returning. "Tell me your name." "And Mara," she whispered. "Mara Ellington." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of something suspected. "No," he said quietly. "Your full name, your true name." Mara stared at him, confused. I don't understand." He knelt again, this time close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way snowflakes melted before they touched his skin. "Mara Ellington," he said, each word deliberate, "of the veil-bound line." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd never heard that phrase before. Never heard anything like it. But something in her chest recognized it, something deep and sleeping and suddenly, terrifyingly awake. "I don't know what that means," she breathed. "I know." His voice was impossibly gentle. "But I do." The lean warrior stepped forward, eyes scanning the rooftops now, the windows, the shadows between buildings. "Azirian," he said quietly. "We should move. If we can sense her, so can they." Azirian. Even his name sounded like something from another world. Mara clutched her children tighter. "Please," she sobbed. "Please, just take them. Take Jonas and Lila. I'm not asking for myself. Just save my babies. They don't deserve to die because I failed them." Jonas made a small, broken sound. Lila's tears soaked through Mara's dress. Azirian stood slowly, towering over her. Snow swirled around him like a living thing, and for a moment he looked less like a man and more like winter itself given form. "No," he said. The word was final as a grave closing. Mara's heart shattered. She'd begged a monster for mercy and found none. Jonas would die coughing blood. Lila would freeze in her arms, and she would die knowing she'd failed them in every way that mattered. Then Azirian extended his hand. "I will not take your children from you," he said, his voice carrying across the silent street. "I will take you all." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone crossed themselves. The sheriff's hand tightened on his gun. "You belong with me now," Azirian continued, his red eyes holding hers. "All three of you. Your lives are bound to mine." The lean warrior, Riven, he'd been called, moved with liquid grace to stand beside his king, watching the crowd with predatory focus. The bearded one's hands dropped to his daggers. The quiet one positioned himself protectively, ready for violence. "Like hell," the sheriff said, raising his rifle. "You're not taking anyone anywhere." Azirian didn't even look at him. His gaze remained fixed on Mara, waiting. "What are you?" Mara whispered. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a human face, but was something else entirely on his. "Your salvation," he said simply. "If you'll accept it." Behind him, his warriors stood ready for war. In front of him, Mara held her dying children and made her choice. Sheriff Brant raised his rifle, and 6 men stepped forward with him, weapons trained on the pale figure standing in the snow. "Step away from the woman," Brant ordered, his voice trying for authority, but landing somewhere closer to fear. "Whatever you are, whatever you think you're doing here, it ends now." Azirian didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the weapons pointed at his chest. His hand remained extended toward Mara, patient and unwavering. "The children stay here," Brant continued, emboldened by the silence. "Mara Ellington has nothing worth taking. She's a widow with 2 starving brats and bad luck following her like a shadow. You want charity cases, you can find them elsewhere." Jonas began to cry, soft, hiccuping sobs that shook his thin frame. Lila buried her face in Mara's shoulder, whimpering. Mara pulled them both against her body, trying to shield them with her own flesh, her own bones, as if that could possibly be enough. The lean warrior, Riven, turned his head slowly toward the armed men. Then he laughed. It was a cold sound, sharp as breaking ice, utterly devoid of humor. "Mortals with rifles," he said, his voice carrying a dangerous amusement. "How quaint." "I'm warning you," Brant started. "You're warning us?" Riven's smile was a predator's smile, all teeth and promise. "That's adorable." The bearded warrior, Cashin, hadn't moved, but his eyes flashed silver, bright as moonlight on snow. He was looking at the armed men with the detached focus of someone solving a mathematical equation. Angles, distances, how many seconds it would take to disarm them all. His hands rested casually on his daggers, and somehow that casual readiness was more terrifying than any aggressive stance could have been. The third warrior, Eldrick, spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made the words land with more weight. "Lower your weapons." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The kind you give someone standing at the edge of a cliff, offering them one chance to step back before gravity claims them. "Like hell," Brant said, and adjusted his aim to point directly at Azirian's head. "I've heard the stories about you. About things that walk in the dark wearing human faces. Maybe you're real, maybe you're not, but I'll be damned if I let you walk out of Briar's Hollow with." The lantern in Azirian's hand flared. The amber light inside burned suddenly bright, impossibly bright, washing the street in a glow that should have been warm but felt cold as midwinter. The air itself seemed to crystallize, and the rifles froze. Not metaphorically, not slowly. Instantly, completely, the metal turned white with rime. Frost spread across barrels and stalks like living vines, intricate patterns of ice blooming in the span of a heartbeat. The wood cracked with the sound of breaking bones. The men holding them cried out, their hands burning with cold. Sheriff Brant's finger was already on the trigger. He pulled it. The trigger snapped off in his hand like frozen glass, shattering into glittering fragments that fell into the snow. Someone dropped their rifle. Then another. Then all of them, the weapons hitting the ground with muffled thuds, already useless, already dead things. Azirian finally looked at the sheriff. Just looked at him. Didn't speak, didn't threaten, didn't move. He simply met Brant's eyes with that burning red gaze, and the sheriff took an involuntary step backward. "Mara Ellington and her children," Azirian said, his voice carrying despite its quietness, "are under my protection now. They belong to me. Harm them, threaten them, or speak their names with anything less than respect, and I will return to this town." He paused, let the silence stretch. "You will not enjoy my return." Riven was smiling openly now, watching the townspeople with obvious enjoyment. Cashin's silver eyes tracked every movement in the crowd, cataloging who might still be foolish enough to try something. Eldrick had already moved to the black carriage that stood behind them, a vehicle Mara suddenly realized had been there all along, though she couldn't remember seeing it arrive. "Prepare the carriage," Azirian ordered without looking away from Mara. "We're leaving." "Finally," Riven muttered. "I was hoping someone would do something stupid. Still might if we're lucky." "Riven." Eldrick's voice carried a note of patient warning. "I said what I said." Mara's arms were shaking. Her children were crying. The town she'd lived in for 3 years stood watching from doorways and windows, and not a single person moved to help. Not one. They'd watched her starve, watched her children waste away, watched her walk barefoot through a blizzard to give away her babies, and now they watched her being claimed by something inhuman. And still no one helped. "I don't." Mara's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't understand what's happening." Azirian's expression softened. He knelt again, his hand still extended. "You will. But first you must choose. Stay here and die with dignity, or come with me and live with uncertainty. Either way, Mara Ellington, you deserve better than this town has given you." Jonas coughed, wet and rattling. Lila's lips were turning blue. Behind Azirian, the carriage door stood open. Inside looked dark and warm and impossible. The children, Mara started. We'll be safe, Azirian interrupted. Fed, warm, protected. As will you. I give you my word, and I have kept my word for longer than this town has existed. Mara looked at the sheriff, at Mrs. Crawford, at Mr. Bennet, and all the others. Looked at their fear, their judgment, their relief that something was taking the problem away from them. No safety here. No safety anywhere. Except maybe in the impossible choice standing before her. All right, she whispered. We'll come. Azirian's hand closed gently around hers, and his skin was cold as winter, but somehow not cruel. He helped her to her feet, and she pulled Jonas and Lila with her on shaking legs. Smart woman, Riven said approvingly. Cashin was already scanning the tree line beyond town, alert for threats Mara couldn't see. Eldrick held the carriage door open, his ancient eyes kind. And Mara, holding her dying children, walked away from everything she'd ever known into the darkness of a monster's carriage, because sometimes salvation wore a terrible face, and sometimes you had no choice but to trust it anyway. The carriage lurched forward, and Mara watched through the small window as Briar's Hollow began to shrink behind her. The town she'd called home for 3 years. The streets where she'd walked with Thomas, his hand warm in hers, talking about the future they'd build together. The mercantile, where she'd bought fabric for Lila's first dress. The church where they'd buried an empty coffin with Thomas's name on it because there'd been nobody to bury. All of it disappearing into the white distance like it had never existed at all. Jonas rested against her side, his breathing shallow and labored. She could feel the heat of his fever through his threadbare coat, burning against her ribs. Lila clung to her dress with both hands, silent as she'd been for days, staring at nothing with those enormous hollow eyes. Across from them, Azirian sat perfectly still. Not the stillness of someone resting. The stillness of something that didn't need to breathe, didn't need to shift its weight, didn't need to do any of the small, unconscious movements that marked something as alive. He watched the children with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. There was something careful in his gaze. Almost protective. The silence stretched. Outside, Mara could hear the crunch of snow under wheels, the steady rhythm of hooves, the wind howling like something mourning. Inside, there was only breathing, hers quick and frightened, Jonas's wet and struggling, and Azirian's complete absence of it. How far have you traveled? Mara asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She needed to fill the silence with something, anything, before it crushed her completely. Azirian's red eyes lifted to meet hers. Far enough. To find me? Yes. The single word landed heavy as a stone. Mara's hands tightened around her children. Why? The question came out broken. Why would you? I'm nobody. A widow with 2 starving children, and nothing to my name. What could you possibly want with us? You are not nobody, Mara Ellington. His voice was soft but absolute. You never were. Then what am I? He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're someone I should have found sooner. Jonas coughed, and Mara turned her attention to him, wiping blood from his lips with the edge of her sleeve. The cloth was already stained dark. How much more could his small body lose before there was nothing left? Your son needs medicine, Azirian said. I know. Mara's voice cracked. I've known for weeks. But medicine costs money, and she couldn't finish. I didn't need to. He'll have it. Tonight, when we make camp. Mara looked up sharply. You have medicine? Why didn't you? Because you wouldn't have trusted me if I'd offered it in town. You would have thought it poisoned or worse. His head tilted slightly. Was I wrong? He wasn't. Even now, sitting in his carriage, surrounded by creatures who could freeze rifles with a thought, Mara didn't know if she'd made a terrible mistake or the only choice that could save them. Through the window, she could see Riven riding alongside the carriage on a black horse that moved too smoothly through the deep snow. He sat in the saddle like violence waiting to happen, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line, the road ahead, the shadows between snowdrifts. Everything about him was sharp features, sharp awareness, sharp readiness to kill. Your men, Mara said. What are they? Warriors. Loyal ones. Riven has served me for 83 years. Cashin for 97. Eldrick for longer than either of us care to count. The numbers didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. But that would make them the same as me. Yes. Vampires. She was trapped in a carriage with a vampire king, being guarded by vampire warriors, riding into the wilderness with her dying children, and no way back. You're afraid, Azirian observed. Not a question. Wouldn't you be? Probably. Fear is honest. It means you're still thinking clearly. He leaned forward slightly, his movements fluid and inhuman. But I want you to understand something, Mara. I did not travel through a blizzard, through hostile territory, through weeks of searching, just to harm you. If I meant you or your children are ill, you would already be dead. The bluntness should have been terrifying. Instead, it was almost comforting, the plain truth instead of pretty lies. Then what do you want with us? To keep you alive. To keep you safe. He paused. To correct a mistake I made long ago. What mistake? Your husband, Azirian said quietly. Thomas Ellington. He didn't wander into the woods and get lost, did he? Mara's breath caught. The search parties said. The search parties were wrong. Or perhaps they simply didn't look in the right places. His red eyes held hers. Your husband was taken, Mara, by creatures who want what's in your children's blood. The carriage suddenly felt too small, too close. What are you talking about? Jonas and Lila are just children. They're not. They don't have anything. They have everything, Azirian interrupted. A bloodline older than most kingdoms. Power sleeping in their veins that others would kill to possess or destroy. His voice softened. The power that got their father killed when he tried to protect them. Lila whimpered against Mara's side. Jonas's eyes fluttered open, confused and feverish. You're saying Thomas knew? Mara's voice was breaking apart. He knew something was hunting us, and he didn't tell me. He was trying to lead them away, to make them think he was the only one who mattered. Azirian's expression was almost sympathetic. He failed. But he died trying to save you. Mara couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Everything she thought she knew about Thomas's disappearance was shattering, reforming into something darker and more terrible. Outside, Cashin appeared ahead on the road, his silver eyes glowing faintly in the gathering dusk. He made some gesture to Riven that Mara didn't understand. Behind them, Eldrick rode with quiet watchfulness, his hand never far from his weapon. I can't tell, Mara whispered, if you've rescued us, or if you've just claimed us for yourself. Azirian's lips curved into something that might have been sad. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. But I can promise you this. With me, your children will survive the winter. Without me, they'll be dead before spring, and whatever killed your husband will have won. The truth of it settled over her like snow, cold, inevitable, inescapable. She held Jonas and Lila closer, feeling their heartbeats against hers, and watched the last light fade from the sky. Night fell like a curtain dropping, and with it came the shadows. Not natural shadows, not the gentle darkness that followed sunset. These moved wrong, rippling against the wind, pooling in places where no shade should gather. Mara watched them through the carriage window, her skin prickling with instinctive dread. Jonas's fever had worsened as the light faded. His skin burned against her, and his breathing had turned into a desperate rattle that seemed to shake his entire body. Lila had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep against Mara's shoulder, her small chest rising and falling with fragile regularity. Azirian sat motionless as he had for hours, but something had changed. His stillness had turned sharp, focused. His head tilted slightly, listening to something Mara couldn't hear. Then the carriage stopped. Not gradually. Abruptly, wheels locking, horses snorting nervously. Azirian. Riven's voice came from outside, casual but alert. We have company. I know. Azirian's eyes never left the window. How many? 7. Maybe 8. Hard to tell when they're still forming. Forming. The word sent ice down Mara's spine. Cashin? Azirian called. Already ahead of you. The reply came from somewhere in the darkness. They're circling. Professional. Patient. Eldrick. Carriage is secure. For now. Azirian finally looked at Mara, and there was something apologetic in his expression. Keep the children close. Don't leave the carriage no matter what you see or hear. Do you understand? What's out there? Mara's voice was barely a whisper. The reason I came for you. He moved then, rising in a fluid motion that was too fast to track, and stepped through the carriage door into the night. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud. Through the window, Mara watched the forest. The shadows were moving faster now, coalescing into shapes that were almost human, but fundamentally wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Limbs that bent at angles that defied anatomy. Jonas coughed, wet and violent, and his eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. Mama? His voice was small, frightened. What's happening? Sure, baby. It's all right. We're safe. She was lying. She was definitely lying. One of the shadows broke from the tree line, and Riven met it with his blade. The sound was wrong, not metal on flesh, but metal on something that shrieked and smoked where it was cut. Riven moved like water, like wind, like violence given form. His blade was a silver blur in the darkness, and where it struck, the shadow thing screamed in voices that hurt to hear. Another shape lunged from the opposite side, and silver fire erupted in the night. Cashin stood with his daggers drawn, but flames crawled along the blades, cold fire that burned white and blue and cast everything in harsh relief. He moved with brutal precision, each strike calculated, each motion economical. When the shadow thing tried to reform, he burned it until there was nothing left but smoke. A third creature came from behind, massive and terrible, and Eldrick simply caught it. His hands closed around what passed for its throat, and he slammed it into the frozen ground with enough force to crack stone. The creature thrashed, hissed, tried to dissolve back into shadow. Eldrick held it solid with sheer will, his eyes glowing faint amber, and tore it apart with his bare hands. Mara pressed her children's faces against her chest, trying to shield them from the nightmare outside. But one of the creatures was faster than the others. Smaller. More cunning. It slipped past Riven's blade, past Cashin's fire, past Eldrick's guard. It flowed like smoke toward the carriage, moving with terrible purpose. Azirian appeared between it and the door, his lantern blazing. The creature recoiled, shrieking, but not retreating. Mara Ellington. It hissed, its voice like glass scraping stone. Veil-bound. Ours. Ours to take. Ours to break. More shapes emerged from the forest. Too many. They were everywhere, pressing closer, and Azirian's warriors were already engaged, already fighting, already bleeding black ichor that steamed in the snow. One of them broke through. It smashed through the carriage window in an explosion of glass and shadow, reaching for Lila with hands that were claws, with fingers that were knives. Lila screamed, and Mara moved without thinking. She threw herself forward, putting her body between the creature and her daughter, her hands coming up in a desperate, futile gesture of protection. And light erupted from her palms. Silver fire, pure and bright and burning cold. It hit the shadow creature like a physical force, sending it flying backward through the broken window. Where the light touched it, the thing's form dissolved, unraveling into smoke that screamed as it died. Mara stared at her hands, shaking, glowing, impossible. The silver fire flickered and faded, but her palms still tingled with something that felt like lightning trapped beneath her skin. Outside, the fighting had stopped. Azirian stood perfectly still, staring at her through the shattered window. His red eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something that looked like awe, like recognition, like a puzzle piece finally falling into place. Impossible, Riven breathed, lowering his blade. Not impossible, Cashin said quietly. Prophesied. Eldrick approached the carriage slowly, carefully, his ancient eyes fixed on Mara with something that might have been reverence. Azirian stepped closer to the window, his voice soft. Your blood has awakened. I don't. Mara looked at her hands, at her children, at the smoking remains of the creature she destroyed. I don't understand. What did I do? What am I? What you were always meant to be. Azirian's expression held a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. What your ancestors were before the world forgot them. What your children will become if we can keep them alive long enough. Jonas stared at her with fever-bright eyes. Mama, you're glowing.
She was.
Faintly. Her skin held a soft silver luminescence that pulsed with her heartbeat. More shadows moved in the forest beyond, circling but not attacking. Watching. Waiting. We need to move, Riven said, scanning the darkness.
Now.
Before they regroup. Agreed. Cashin was already mounting his horse. That was a probing attack. They know what she is now. Next time they'll bring everything. Azirian reached through the broken window and touched Mara's glowing hand gently. His cold skin against hers created a strange sensation, ice and fire meeting without consuming each other. You have questions, he said. I have answers. But first we survive the night. He withdrew, gave orders Mara couldn't quite hear. Riven and Cashin took positions on either side. Aldrich climbed onto the carriage driver's seat, taking the reins. The carriage lurched forward, faster now, urgent. Mara held her children close, her hands still tingling with impossible power, and watched the shadows follow them through the trees. Everything she believed about herself, about her life, her helplessness, her insignificance, was crumbling like ash in the wind. And somewhere in the darkness, something ancient whispered her name with hunger. The carriage didn't stop until they'd put miles between themselves and the forest where shadows hunted. When Eldrick finally pulled the horses to a halt in a small clearing sheltered by rock formations, Mara had been sitting in silence for so long that her voice felt like something foreign when she finally spoke.
Tell me.
The words came out flat, empty of everything except need. Tell me everything. No more cryptic warnings. No more hints. I want the truth. Jonas had fallen into a restless sleep against her side, his fever still burning. Lila clutched Mara's dress with white-knuckled fingers, awake but silent as she'd been for days. Both children were exhausted beyond words, beyond fear. Azirian sat across from her, snow melting in his white hair, his red eyes reflecting the amber light of the lantern that somehow still burned despite everything. You're certain? He asked quietly. Some truths are heavier than the not knowing. I just killed something with light from my hands. Mara's voice shook but held steady. I watched your warriors fight creatures made of shadow that knew my name, knew my children's names. My husband has been dead for 6 months, or maybe he hasn't been. Maybe that's another lie, and you keep talking about bloodlines and prophecies like I'm supposed to understand what any of this means. She leaned forward, careful not to disturb Jonas. So yes, I'm certain. Tell me why assassins are hunting us. Tell me why my hands glow silver. Tell me, her voice cracked. Tell me what really happened to Thomas. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a precipice. Azirian was still for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Your husband didn't wander into the woods that morning. Mara's breath stopped. He knew something was coming. Had known for weeks, perhaps months. He'd seen the signs, shadows that moved wrong, animals fleeing the forest, dreams that felt like warnings. Azirian's expression was carefully controlled. Thomas Ellington was many things, but he wasn't a fool. He knew his family carried something dangerous in their blood, even if he didn't fully understand what. He never said anything. The words came out broken. Not once. Not a single word about danger or shadows or... Because he was trying to protect you, trying to lead them away from you and the children. Azirian leaned forward slightly. The morning he left, he didn't go to Chopwood. He went to offer himself, to trade his life for yours. Mara felt something crack inside her chest.
No.
The Shadowborn clan took him. They're an ancient rival, vampires who feed not on blood, but on the light some mortals carry in their veins. Light like yours, like your children's.
His voice softened.
They wanted him to reveal where you'd come from, who your ancestors were, whether there were others. When he refused to tell them anything, they killed him slowly, trying to break him. Stop. Mara's hands were shaking. Please stop. He never broke. Never spoke your name. Never gave them anything they could use to find you. Azirian's red eyes held hers. He died protecting you, Mara, believing that his silence would buy you time to disappear, to keep the children safe. The grief hit her like a physical blow. Thomas. Her Thomas. Who'd built their cabin with his own hands. Who'd sung to Lila when she couldn't sleep. Who taught Jonas his letters by firelight. He'd known he was going to die and had walked into it anyway. But they found us. Mara's voice was barely a whisper. Despite everything he did, they still found us. Not immediately. It took them months to trace the connection. By then, winter had come, your resources were gone, and you were vulnerable. Azirian's expression darkened. They would have taken your children within days. The only reason they hadn't already was because I arrived first. Lila whimpered softly. Mara pulled her closer, feeling the little girl's tears soak through her dress.
Why?
Mara asked. Why do they want Jonas and Lila? They're children. They're innocent. Because their blood carries the veil-bound legacy. A lineage that stretches back before written history, before kingdoms, before most of what you know as civilization. He spoke carefully, like each word mattered. Your ancestors were mortals who carried light in their veins. Divine light, some called it. Holy fire. They could destroy creatures like the Shadowborn with a touch. Mara stared at her hands, remembering the silver fire that had erupted from them. I've never done anything like that before tonight. Because the power lies dormant until awakened by desperation or danger. Your children carry it stronger than you do, their father's line and yours combining into something that hasn't been seen in generations. Azirian's voice was grave. The Shadowborn want them dead before they grow old enough to master their abilities. Or worse, they want to drain that light while they're young and helpless, consuming it to make themselves stronger. The carriage felt too small suddenly. The air is too thin. Thomas died buying you time. Azirian continued. Time I used to find you, to get to you before they did. And what do you want with us? Mara's voice was sharp with grief and suspicion. You keep saying you're protecting us, but I don't know you. I don't know if you're any better than the things hunting us. Maybe you just want to use Jonas and Lila differently. Something flickered in Azirian's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or old regret. I once knew another veil-bound woman, he said quietly. A century ago. She was hunted just like you, desperate just like you. I found her too late. I watched her die because I didn't understand what she was, what she carried, how much danger she was in. His hands tightened almost imperceptibly. I've spent 100 years searching for survivors of her bloodline. When I learned about you, about Thomas's death, about your children, I swore I wouldn't fail again. He met her eyes directly. I don't want to use them, Mara. I want to keep them alive long enough to teach them how to protect themselves. Mara wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to so desperately. But trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. You're asking me to believe that a vampire king traveled through a blizzard, fought shadow creatures, and risked his warriors' lives out of guilt over someone who died a century ago? Yes. The simplicity of the answer was almost convincing. Outside, Riven's voice carried through the night. Perimeter is secure. For now. Cashin appeared at the broken window. We should keep moving. They'll regroup. Azirian nodded, but didn't break eye contact with Mara. I vow to you, Mara Ellington, on my name and crown and centuries of existence, you will not lose anyone else. Not your son, not your daughter, not yourself. Jonas stirred against her, coughing weakly. Lila's tears had stopped, but she was trembling. Mara held them both and made her choice. If you're lying to me, she said softly, if you hurt them, I will find a way to destroy you. I don't care what you are or how powerful. I will burn you with whatever light is in my blood. Azirian's lips curved into something almost like a smile. I would expect nothing less from a veil-bound mother. The carriage lurched forward again, carrying them deeper into the unknown. And Mara held her children close, mourning the husband who died in silence to save them, trusting a monster because she had no other choice. The encampment appeared in the darkness, like something conjured from snow and shadow. Mara hadn't seen them build it. One moment there was only wilderness, and the next there were tents of black fabric that seemed to absorb light, a fire that burned without smoke, and a perimeter marked by lanterns that glowed with that same unnatural amber. Eldrick carried Jonas from the carriage with a gentleness that shouldn't have been possible from hands that had torn shadow creatures apart hours earlier. Cashin scouted the perimeter one final time before taking his position near the fire. Riven cleaned his blade with methodical precision, his eyes never stopping their constant scan of the darkness beyond the light. And Azirian led Mara to the largest tent, where blankets lined the ground and a brazier burned with heat that felt almost normal. "Lay them here," he said, gesturing to a pallet that looked far too comfortable for a temporary camp. "They need rest. Real rest." Mara lowered Lila onto the blankets, and her daughter immediately curled into a tight ball, still silent, still trembling. Jonas's fever had worsened during the journey. His skin burned to the touch, and his breathing sounded like wind through a broken window. "He's dying," Mara whispered. The words she'd been avoiding for weeks. The truth she couldn't escape anymore. Not tonight. Azirian knelt beside Jonas, producing a small vial from inside his coat. The liquid inside glowed faintly silver. "This will help. It won't cure him completely. His body is fighting too many battles at once, but it will stabilize him. Give him strength." "What is it?" "Something very old, very rare, made from moonflower extract and other things you wouldn't have names for." He uncorked the vial carefully. "Trust me." Mara didn't, not entirely. But Jonas's breathing was getting worse, and she was out of options. She nodded. Azirian tipped the vial to Jonas's lips, coaxing the liquid down drop by drop. The boy swallowed reflexively, and within moments, his breathing began to ease. The terrible rattle faded. Color returned to his lips. "How?" Mara started. "His veil-bound blood recognizes the medicine. It responds to it." Azirian set the empty vial aside. "He'll sleep now."
Deeply.
"When he wakes, the fever will have broken." Mara's hands were shaking. Just like that, just like that. She wanted to cry, wanted to collapse with relief. Instead, she sat beside Jonas and smoothed his hair back from his forehead, feeling his temperature already beginning to drop. Lila had been watching, her enormous eyes tracking every movement. When Eldrick entered the tent carrying a bowl of something that smelled like soup, she flinched back against Mara. "Easy, little one," Eldrick said quietly, his voice impossibly gentle for someone so large. "Just food. Real food. When was the last time you ate something warm?" Lila didn't answer. Didn't move. Eldrick set the bowl down carefully and retreated to the tent entrance, giving her space. "Take your time. I'll be right outside if you need anything." Mara picked up the bowl. Thick stew with chunks of meat and vegetables that looked impossibly fresh for winter, and offered it to Lila. Her daughter stared at it like she'd forgotten what food was. "It's all right, baby," Mara whispered. "You can eat." Slowly, tentatively, Lila reached for the spoon. Outside, Azirian sat by the fire while Riven and Cashin took watch positions in the darkness beyond. Mara joined him after Lila had eaten half the bowl and finally fallen asleep curled against Jonas. "You promised me answers," Mara said, lowering herself onto a log near the flames.
About the veil-bound line.
"About what my children are." Azirian nodded, his red eyes reflecting firelight. The veil-bound were mortals who carried divine light in their blood. Not all mortals, only certain bloodlines, certain families. No one knows exactly where it came from. Some say it was a gift from ancient gods. Others say it was a mutation, something that evolved when the first vampires and dark creatures began to hunt humans. He stared into the flames as he spoke. Whatever its origin, the light made them dangerous. A single veil-bound could destroy dozens of shadow creatures with a touch. They were hunters, protectors, warriors. Entire clans of dark things were wiped out by them. So they killed you? You're kind. They tried. Some succeeded. His lips curved slightly. But the veil-bound weren't immortal. They could be overwhelmed by numbers, tricked, poisoned, killed in their sleep. Over centuries, they were hunted to near extinction. Most of the bloodlines died out. Those that survived went into hiding, married into normal families, let the power go dormant. Mara looked at her hands, remembering the silver fire, until something awakens it.
Exactly.
Danger, desperation, sometimes grief. The light responds to intense emotion, to the need to protect. He turned to look at her. Your children carry it stronger than you do, because their bloodline is pure on both sides. Your husband's family carried it too, though he never knew. When their abilities fully manifest, if they survive long enough, they'll be more powerful than any veil-bound seen in 300 years. The words settled over her like snow. Heavy. Inescapable. That's why the Shadowborn want them dead.
Yes.
And why do I need to keep them alive? Across the camp, Eldrick had returned to the tent entrance, standing guard with patient stillness. Through the fabric, Mara could hear Lila's soft breathing, finally peaceful. You said you knew another veil-bound woman, Mara said quietly. A century ago. Azirian's expression closed off, became distant. Her name was Isolde. She was 23 when I found her, or when she found me, depending on how you tell it. She'd been running for years, hunted by the Shadowborn, watching everyone she loved die trying to protect her. He was quiet for a moment. She came to me begging for help. I didn't understand what she was. Thought she was just another desperate mortal with an enemy problem. I gave her money, supplies, sent her on her way. His voice went flat. 3 days later, the Shadowborn found her in the next town. By the time I realized what she'd been, what she'd needed, she was already gone. Mara heard the century-old grief in his words. Saw it in the tension of his shoulders. You blame yourself. I should have known better. Should have recognized the signs. Should have. He stopped, shook his head. Should have done many things differently. So that's why you're doing this. Guilt. Partly. He looked at her directly. But also because you deserve to survive, Mara. You and your children. Not because of what's in your blood or what you can do. Because you fought to keep them alive when the world gave you every reason to give up. Because you are willing to sacrifice yourself for them. Because you deserve better than what you've been given. Something in Mara's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that this ancient creature genuinely cared about her family beyond whatever power they carried. Inside the tent, Jonas coughed once, a normal cough, not that terrible wet rattle. His breathing was steady now. Strong. Lila stirred, and Eldrick's voice came softly through the fabric. Just me, little one. Go back to sleep. You're safe. And, impossibly, Lila did. Mara watched Azirian's profile in the firelight, the sharp lines of his face, the weight of centuries in his expression, the sorrow he carried like armor. I don't know if I can trust you, she said honestly. I know, but I don't have anywhere else to go. No one else can keep them safe. I know that too. So, I'm going to choose to believe you.
For now.
Because the alternative is she couldn't finish. Death. Azirian said it gently. The alternative is death. Riven's voice carried from the darkness. Movement. Northeast. Could be scouts. Cashin melted into the shadows without a word. Azirian stood, his hand dropping to the sword at his side, a weapon Mara hadn't noticed until now. Stay in the tent with your children. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. What if it's not safe? He looked back at her, and something in his expression was almost warm. Then I'll die making sure you have time to run. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Mara alone by the fire. She returned to the tent, to her children, to the impossible safety of monsters who treated her family with more kindness than her own kind ever had. Jonas slept peacefully, his fever broken. Lila curled against him, no longer trembling. Eldrick stood guard at the entrance, a silent sentinel between them and whatever hunted in the night. And Mara realized with terrifying clarity that she was beginning to trust these creatures, beginning to hope they might actually survive. They traveled for 3 more days through wilderness that grew progressively stranger. The trees became twisted, ancient things that looked like they'd been growing since before memory. The snow took on a faint luminescence at night, glowing with soft blue light that had no natural source. The air itself felt different, thicker, charged with something Mara couldn't name. Jonas's health continued to improve. The color returned to his cheeks, and he could sit up without coughing blood. Lila had started speaking again, just single words at first, then short sentences, mostly to Eldrick, who had somehow become her favorite despite being a vampire who could tear men apart with his bare hands. And Mara felt the power in her blood growing stronger each day. It hummed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, waiting, ready. On the 4th day, they crested a ridge, and nightfall rose before them. The fortress was impossible. That was Mara's first thought. Impossible and beautiful and terrifying all at once. It was carved directly into the mountainside, black stone that seemed to drink light, towers that reached toward the sky like claws, walls that shimmered with what looked like silver frost permanently frozen into the rock itself. Massive gates stood open, revealing a courtyard beyond that glowed with amber lantern light. "Home," Azirian said quietly, and there was something in his voice, relief, perhaps, or the exhaustion of a journey finally ending. The carriage began its descent toward the fortress. They never reached it. The attack came without warning, shadows erupting from the ground itself, from the snow, from the air.
Dozens of them.
Maybe hundreds. The Shadowborn clan had brought everything. Ambush. Riven's shout cut through the air as his blade sang free. Protect the children. The carriage lurched violently as Eldrick yanked the horses to a halt. Cashin was already moving, silver fire erupting along his daggers as he carved through the first wave of attackers. A shadow creature smashed through the carriage wall, not the window this time, but straight through the wood, reaching for Jonas with claws that dripped darkness. Mara didn't hesitate. Silver fire exploded from her hands, brighter than before, stronger than before. The creature shrieked as it dissolved, but 3 more took its place immediately. Jonas. Lila. Stay behind me. Her children scrambled behind her as she unleashed the light again and again, her hands burning with power that felt like lightning and ice and fury all woven together. Each burst sent shadow creatures flying, dissolving, dying. But there were so many. Outside, Riven fought like a storm made flesh. His blade moved faster than Mara's eyes could track, cutting through enemies with brutal efficiency. But even he was being pushed back by sheer numbers. Cashin's silver fire painted the snow in harsh light as he burned through attackers, but more kept coming. His face was grim, focused, calculating odds that weren't in their favor. Eldrick had abandoned the driver's seat and stood directly in front of the shattered carriage, a wall of flesh and fury between the children and anything that wanted to reach them. Blood, his own, black and smoking, dripped from wounds that should have been fatal. He didn't slow down. Then Azirian entered the battle, and everything changed. Mara had seen him fight before, but not like this. Not with the full weight of his ancient power unleashed. He moved through the Shadowborn like death itself, his sword a blur of silver. Where he struck, creatures didn't just die. They unmade, their very essence scattered like ash on the wind. His red eyes blazed with fury that felt older than mountains, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the battlefield with absolute authority. "You dare attack me at the gates of my own fortress?" The shadows hesitated. Just for a moment. It was enough. Azirian raised his free hand, and the amber lantern at his belt flared so bright it was like staring into the sun. The light washed across the battlefield, and the Shadowborn screamed as it burned them, not destroying them but driving them back, forcing them into retreat. But one got through. Larger than the others, faster, more cunning. It slipped past Eldric's guard, past Azirian's light, heading straight for the carriage where Jonas stood frozen with fear. No! Mara screamed, and something inside her broke open completely. The silver fire that erupted from her wasn't light anymore. It was a column of pure radiance that shot from her palms like a lance, striking the creature mid-leap.
The thing didn't dissolve.
It simply ceased to exist, erased from reality by the force of Mara's desperate fury. The power backlashed through her body, like being struck by lightning. Pain exploded through every nerve, every bone. She heard herself scream, felt her knees give out, tasted blood. But Jonas was safe. The battlefield went quiet. The Shadowborn were retreating, fleeing back into the shadows from which they'd emerged. Azirian's warriors stood among the carnage, bloodied but alive. Mara tried to stand and couldn't. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. Her hands were shaking violently, still glowing faintly silver, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Mama! Jonas was beside her, crying, his small hands on her face. Mama, don't die.
Please don't die.
She coughed, tasted more blood. I'm all right, baby. I'm all right. She wasn't. She could feel it. She'd used too much power too fast, and her mortal body couldn't contain it. Something inside her was burning itself out. Then Azirian was there, kneeling in the blood-soaked snow, his red eyes wide with something that looked like fear. Mara. His hands were gentle as he lifted her, cradling her against his chest. Don't close your eyes. Stay with me. The children are safe. Eldric has them. Look at me, Mara. Stay awake. His voice was the only thing keeping her tethered to consciousness. Everything else was fading, the pain, the cold, the sound of Jonas crying. Azirian was running now, moving faster than should be possible, the fortress gates rushing toward them. Voices shouted orders. Doors crashed open. Warm air washed over her face. He laid her on something soft, a bed, maybe, or a table. Faces appeared above her, speaking words she couldn't quite hear. Azirian's face filled her vision. He pressed his hand against her forehead, and coolness spread through her, soothing the fire in her blood. Listen to me, he said softly, his voice cutting through the fog. You are far more than you believe yourself to be, Mara Ellington. Far more than a desperate widow. Far more than a frightened mother.
She tried to speak. Couldn't.
You are veil-bound. You are prophecy made flesh. You are the mother of the future. His hand tightened on hers. And I will not let you die. Not after everything. Not when you've come this far. The world was going dark around the edges. But she could hear Jonas and Lila crying somewhere nearby. Could feel Azirian's cold hand holding hers like an anchor. Sleep now, he whispered. You're safe. Your children are safe. When you wake, you'll be stronger than you were. I promise you. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to stay awake, to make sure her children were truly all right. But exhaustion pulled at her like deep water, and Azirian's promise was the only thing she had to hold on to. She let the darkness take her. When she woke, hours later, or maybe days, it was to the sound of Lila's laughter echoing through stone halls and sunlight streaming through windows carved into a mountainside. She was alive. Her children were alive. And somewhere in the fortress of black stone and silver frost, a vampire king sat watching over them all, keeping his ancient promise to a woman who'd had nothing left to give except her trust. Mara closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, let herself believe they might actually survive. Mara woke to warmth. Real warmth. Not the desperate, failing heat of a dying fire in a freezing cabin, but genuine comfort that sank into her bones and made her realize just how cold she'd been for months. She opened her eyes to a room carved from dark stone, but softened with tapestries and furs. Sunlight, actual sunlight, streamed through a tall window, painting everything in shades of gold. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in. Mama? Jonas sat beside the bed, his eyes clear and bright. No fever. No cough. He looked like himself again, like the boy he'd been before Winter tried to kill him. Baby. Mara's voice came out rough, but she reached for him, and he threw himself into her arms. Are you all right? Is Lila? I'm here, Mama. Lila appeared on the other side of the bed, climbing up to burrow against Mara's side. Her blonde curls were clean and brushed. She was wearing a dress that actually fit. And she was smiling. Mara held them both, breathing them in, feeling their solid warmth and realizing with stunning clarity that they were going to live. All of them. They were actually going to live. How long was I asleep? 2 days. Eldric's voice came from the doorway. The large warrior stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, looking almost bashful. You burned through a tremendous amount of power. Your body needed time to recover. The attack. Repelled. The Shadowborn won't return. Not after what you did to their champion. Something that might have been pride flickered in his ancient eyes. You unmade him, Mara. Erased him from existence with nothing but your will and your light. She remembered. Remembered the terror of seeing that creature lunging for Jonas. Remembered the power that had exploded from her like a star-going nova. Azirian wants to see you. Eldric continued gently. When you're ready. No rush. The children are safe here. Fed, warm, protected. Mara kissed Jonas's forehead, then Lila's. Stay here with Eldric. I'll be right back. Promise. Lila's voice was small. I promise, baby. I'm not going anywhere. She followed Eldric through corridors of black stone veined with silver, past windows that looked out over mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The fortress was beautiful in a severe, ancient way, built to last forever, built to withstand anything. They emerged onto a balcony that overlooked the main gates. Azirian stood there, his white hair moving slightly in the wind, his red eyes fixed on the horizon. Leave us, he said quietly, and Eldric bowed before retreating. Mara stepped forward, her legs still shaky but holding. She looked out over the view, snow-covered peaks, forests that stretched to infinity, skies so blue it hurt to look at. It's beautiful, she said. It's safe, Azirian replied. That's more important. They stood in silence for a moment. Thank you, Mara said finally, for saving us, for bringing us here, for, her voice caught, for not giving up on us. I told you I wouldn't. He turned to face her fully. And I meant it. Why? The question that had been building for days. You keep saying it's about the woman you failed to save, about my bloodline, about prophecy. But I need to understand, why does any of that matter to you? You're a king. You've lived for centuries. What are we to you really? Azirian was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. There's a prophecy, he said finally. Old as my kind. It says that when the world grows dark enough, when the shadow creatures grow bold enough to hunt openly, the veil-bound line will produce children whose light can burn away the darkness completely. Not just fight it. End it. He looked at her with those ancient eyes. Your children, Mara. Jonas and Lila. They're that prophecy. Their power, once fully awakened, once properly trained, could destroy every shadow creature that hunts in the dark. Could make the world safe for mortals again in a way it hasn't been for 1,000 years. The weight of it settled over her like snow. That's why the Shadowborn want them dead.
Yes.
And that's why I will die before I let anything happen to them. His voice was absolute. But it's not just about prophecy anymore, Mara. You fought for them when you had nothing. You were willing to give them away to save them. You unleashed power you didn't understand to protect them. That kind of love, that kind of fierce, unbreakable love, is rarer than any bloodline. He took a step closer. You deserve to rise. Not to die nameless in a forgotten town. Not to sacrifice yourself for scraps of charity. You deserve to become what you were always meant to be. Mara felt tears burning in her eyes. And what's that? Powerful. Protected. Free. She looked down at her hands, still faintly scarred from where the silver fire had burned through her. I don't know how to be any of those things. Then I'll teach you. Azirian's voice softened. If you'll let me. Mara thought of Jonas, healthy and laughing. Of Lila, speaking again, trusting again. Of the life they could have here, safe, warm, alive. She thought of Thomas, who died trying to protect them. Of the town that had watched them starve. Of the impossible choice she'd made in the snow. And she thought of the power inside her, terrifying and painful and hers. Then teach me, she said, her voice steady. Teach me so I can protect them. So I can protect myself. So we never have to beg for survival again. Something shifted in Azirian's expression, respect, perhaps, or satisfaction. He bowed his head. It was a small gesture, a slight inclination, but Mara understood instinctively that it meant something. That vampire kings didn't bow to anyone, let alone mortal widows with nothing to their names. Mara Ellington, he said formally, his voice carrying power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. I, Azirian Vale, king of the Northern Court, declare you and your children under my eternal protection. Your enemies are my enemies. Your blood is sacred. Your lives are bound to mine until the stars go dark. He raised his head, meeting her eyes. You are mine to protect, now and always. The words felt like a vow, like magic settling into her bones. Mara straightened her spine, lifted her chin. She was barefoot, wearing borrowed clothes, still weak from nearly burning herself out. But she was alive. Her children were alive. And she was done being helpless. Then let's begin, she said. Azirian smiled, a real smile, warm and almost human.
Come.
Your children are waiting, and you have much to learn. He led her back inside, through corridors that no longer felt foreign but felt like possibility, like future. Behind them, Riven and Cashin fell into step as guards. Ahead, Eldrick waited with Jonas and Lila, both children running to their mother the moment they saw her. Mara caught them, held them close, and looked back at Azirian one more time. He nodded once. A promise kept. A promise continuing. And Mara stepped fully across the threshold into Nightfall Reach. No longer a starving widow from a forgotten frontier town. No longer a woman the world had tried to erase. She was Mara Ellington of the Veilbound line. Mother of prophecy. Student of a vampire king. And for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The massive gates of black stone and silver frost closed behind them with a sound like destiny sealing itself. Outside, winter still raged. Inside, a new story was beginning.